Welcome to Perspectives in Mobile, the news podcast from the Mobile Ecosystem Forum. Join us discussing the world of telecommunications, technology, and mobile innovations. From Florence, Ricardo Amati.
Welcome to a new episode of MAV podcast series Perspectives, in which experts, industry leaders, and sometimes social psychologists talk about what they think, see, and expect in the world of technology, telecommunications, and the innovative services, and about how the digital change is affecting human beings. I am Ricardo Amati. After more than a decade of stability or improvement, the mental health of adolescents plunged in the early 2010s in many countries. At the same time, rates of depression, anxiety, self-harm, and suicide rose sharply, more than doubling on many measures. Are smartphones and social media the culprit? We are joined today by Zach Rausch, Associate Research Scientist at the New York University Stern School of Business, lead researcher to social psychologist Jonathan Haidt, and a researcher for the Center for Human Technology. Welcome, Zach. Thank you for joining.
Ricardo, thank you so much for having me on, and hello to all your listeners who are out there.
Zach, did the use of social media and mobile phones create an anxious generation? That's the title of social psychologist Jonathan Haidt's last book, a result of your research as well. Is it mobile phones and social media's fault?
Going for the heavy hitters first. So the story that we tell in the book is that it's a two-factor story. It's not all about smartphones and social media. It actually starts before that. Beginning in the 1980s, in the US and in many other countries around the world, we began to systematically deprive children and adolescents of independence, free play, and responsibility. And the work of childhood is to play. All mammals need to play. And we started to pull them more indoors, having more supervision, in large part because society became more fearful that kids couldn't be outdoors. And then this independence-deprived generation, especially those who are now born after 1995, which is Gen Z, this independence-deprived generation moved their social lives almost entirely onto smartphones and social media right around 2010 to 2015. And what we call this transformation, which started slowly in the 80s, accelerated in the 90s, and then went full force in the 2010s, is the movement from a play-based childhood into the phone-based childhood. And the phone-based childhood is what we argue is hostile and incompatible with human development and human flourishing.
Is there a scientifically tested relation between teenage mental illness rates and smartphone mass adoption? You said it started and it increased relatively soon when smartphones became, common everywhere.
Yeah, so let me say a couple things here. The first is just to understand the timing of all of this and what happened, and then I'll go into the research. So what our argument is that smartphones themselves are actually not that problematic. Social media itself, not that problematic. It is the combination of the two. And the two came together right around 2010, and social media really changed. So before 2010, in 2007, the iPhone is launched, and it was pretty simple. It was just you can call, you can use email, and I think you could access the internet. Those are the three big things. But then it really started to change as you get the App Store the next year. You get the like button and retweet buttons, and they change from being social networking systems into social media platforms, where now we're standing on a stage presenting and posting images and videos of oneself as the smartphone becomes more sophisticated, we get the front-facing camera. So now we're not only taking pictures of the world, we're focusing inward on the self. And it's these design changes that really are crucial to understanding why these platforms became more harmful. In 2010, we also got Instagram, the first social media platform designed for social media. Designed for smartphones. And so this is the exact period when teens moved onto their social lives onto these platforms, and these platforms were getting more engaging, more addictive, and much more viral. And these are the kinds of problems that ended up, we believe, causing a huge devastation in their mental health. Now, in terms of the research, there is a huge body of research. John Haidt, Jean Twenge, another researcher, and I have put together a really long and extensive open source Google document where we've tried to collect hundreds, every study that we could find that looks at the correlational studies down to the experiments. And so we break it up looking, so from correlations, like what if use of social media is related to mental health outcomes among teens. And then we look at, do the experiments also show those effects? And what we find as we go through all of these studies, and we can talk more about this, is that when we look really broadly, if you just look at how does social media use affect people, it's very negligible. But when we zoom in and we look at what is the effect on adolescents, and particularly adolescent girls, especially those who are going through puberty, the effect gets much stronger. And we get a correlation around 0.2, 0.15 to 0.2, which is quite substantial in public health measures.
What's the difference between boys and girls on how they are affected by the issues we are talking about?
It's a very important question. The way that we think about this is both boys and girls moved into the virtual world in more of an unprecedented kind of way in the 2010s, but they went to different places. So what we find is that both boys and girls on average are spending around 7 to 9 hours every single day on screens. And girls in particular are spending an average of about 5 hours every day on social media platforms. Boys are not spending as much time on social media. They're spending much more time gaming, watching videos, YouTube, and pornography. That's where boys are. Girls are spending much more time on social media. So if we're trying to understand the differences, we just need to look at where they're spending their time and how these platforms are designed and different. So what is true for both boys and girls is that there has been a real surge in feelings of loneliness, in meaninglessness, in a bunch of different items around their sense of self. But what is unique with boys and girls is that we've seen a huge rise in anxiety, depression, self-harm, and those measures are not rising quite as much as for the boys. But what we fundamentally argue is that in both cases, boys and girls are being lured into a very engaging and exciting virtual universe, but it's not providing the kind of quality relationships that make you feel connected, embodied, and help you gain the skills that you need to thrive as a flourishing adult.
So, among the various things that can happen to childhood, you mentioned addiction, like porn, and what else? For example, attention fragmentation. It's a problem which is becoming more and more frequent in schools, as far as we understand. Is that connected with the issues we're talking about?
Yeah, so in the book, we talk about that there are 4 foundational harms to the phone-based childhood. And then there are a bunch of specific harms focused on girls and a bunch for boys. And there are many ways that this is, that the phone-based childhood is rewiring. Like our entire social web of what it is to be childhood has been changed. But those four foundational harms, I'll just walk through them real quick. The first is the opportunity cost. And so just a minute before, I was discussing that kids are spending 7 to 9 hours on social media, on screens per day. And what that means is that so much of life is being pushed out. And what we found is that kids are sleeping less. They are less, spending less time, much less time with other kids in person. And what we found is that actually in 2003 or so, kids 15 to 24-year-olds are spending about 2 hours or so a day with friends. By 2019, before the COVID pandemic set in, we get to around 40 minutes per day. So huge decline in the amount of time people are spending with each other. So sleep, socialization, time with family, time studying, time reading books, everything gets pushed out. So just the simple opportunity cost. Are they what?
Would you define, are they lonely? Is loneliness a problem, becoming a problem?
So here's just one statistic here. This comes from a national survey in the United States called Monitoring the Future. And what they found was that in 2009, they asked an item about, I often feel lonely, and how much agreement there is to that question. In 2009, 13% of boys agreed with that statement. By 2019, that went up to just about 30%. So there's been a huge increase for both boys and girls in feeling disconnected and lonely. And it's ironic because they're moving into social media platforms or gaming platforms that are sold as networking, connecting virtual spaces, but they seem to be providing the opposite. They give you temporary pleasure, but not the deep quality relationships that kids really need to thrive.
Temporary pleasure, nothing stable. That's the definition of addiction, more or less.
Yeah. So there's a lot of debate among researchers about whether or not we can call something that these platforms truly addictive. But a more useful term that we use is problematic use. And lots of researchers, problematic use. And generally what we find is, do these platforms disrupt family life? Do they disrupt your in-person relationships, abilities with schoolwork and other things? And we find that just about between 5 to 15% of boys and girls have problematic use. With either boys, it's towards gaming typically, and girls, it's towards social media. And there's really no other consumer product that we would be okay with giving our kids, saying, there's a 1 in 10 chance that maybe your kid is going to have a lot of problems with school, with friendship, with family. It's the situation we're in now is really quite crazy.
The most horrible thing, suicide, is there a problem that is trying to, is increasing as a trend, a societal trend, because of these reasons, is it?
Yeah, the trends in suicide are, this is definitely a more complicated issue, but what we know to be true is that since 2010, there's been an over 50% increase in suicide rates among 10 to 19-year-olds in the United States. And among Gen Z girls, so those born after 1995, they have higher rates of suicide than any previous generation before them in the 5 major Anglosphere countries. And so what we're finding again and again is that right around the same time, between 2010 and 2015, all across the English-speaking world, the Nordic countries, and many parts of Western Europe, the mental health of preteen girls especially, and then also adolescents in general, just fell off of a cliff. And the argument that we make in the book is that we have been overprotecting kids in the real world, systematically depriving them of that independence and responsibility they need, and then underprotecting them in the virtual world, where they are thrown into this virtual universe that is unstable, where there is no age really restrictions on anything, and they're just expected to be able to figure this out at age 10, 11, 12, 13 years old.
There are great definitions in the book, like a great rewiring of childhood, collective actions problem. What rules might set us free from these problems?
One of the things that is so it's both sad, but also there's hope in this finding, is that when you ask kids or young people whether or not they typically want to be on social media, the question that they'll typically ask is, well, are other people, if you ask them if they want to get off of social media, they'll ask are other people also going to get off? And the answer typically, if you say, yes, we're going to get everybody off of the platforms, then they say, I would like that. But if you say, if you're the only one who's going to get off, no, I don't want to do that. And we found that...
Ironically, it's a way of socializing.
Exactly. You need to be on these platforms in order to connect with anybody these days. And this is the trap. So they're stuck in a social trap. And an experiment was done just last year on this where they said, how much money would it take for you to get off TikTok or Instagram? And they said, the participants said $50. You got to give me money, right? So that's the value that's being placed on this. But then they say, how much money would we need to give you to get off TikTok and Instagram if we got everybody else in your community off of it? And they said, we will pay you. The participants will pay you, the researchers. So
that's
in
a
negative
very
number.
good one. Fantastic
Right.
experiment. Very interesting. Absolutely.
Very, very important, because again, it shows that kids are stuck in a trap and they don't have true choice. They are being, in many ways, exploited by these companies who've put them into a social trap, lured them in, and now they can't get out. And so we need to free them. And how do we do that? What we argue in the jurors, that doesn't rely on the tech companies to change, because that's going to be difficult to get to happen and it will take time. But the 4 norms is no smartphones until high school. Trying to delay, because the greatest period of harm tends to be during early puberty. So let's get phones out of that early adolescence. The second is no social media until 16. And again, this needs to be done collectively for this to work. So teaming up with other parents of your friends' kids, and you say, let's work together to delay. Number 3 is phone-free schools. And this is happening in many parts of the world right now. There's a big push for this, where kids go to school, they have to put their phone into a pouch or into a phone locker, and they get 7 hours of childhood back. And this is happening at a group level. And the final part is that we need to give back independence, responsibility, and free play in the real world for them to play like all mammals need to play in order to.
And the governments, for example, that's pretty new, I think. Yesterday's news. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed a bill prohibiting minors under 14 from having social media accounts, requiring parental consent for 14 and 15-year-olds, and mandating age verification for all users. Do you think that's useful?
Absolutely. I think the problem is just that there are, it's going to have to go through the courts, and there are a lot of legal battles around this. But the general principle here is we're expecting the entire responsibility for keeping kids out of bars, out of strip clubs, whatever it is, that's not for the institutions to have to deal with. That's only the parents. Right. And of course not. Of course not. We have a reason why that we have the government, and to help impose these kinds of rules. And this is what we need to do here. We need to at least make it that those under 13 which is already the rule in the United States, shouldn't be able to get onto these platforms. And the companies need to enforce that.
Thank you, Zach. Zach Rausch, Associate Research Scientist at New York University Stern School of Business, and a lead researcher to social psychologist Jonathan Haidt. Did I pronounce it well? And a researcher as well for the Center of Human Technology. Very engaging, very interesting, Zach. Thank you very much. That's all for this episode of Perspective, the math podcast about expert and industry leaders talking about what they think, see, and expect in the world of technology, telecommunications, and innovative mobile services. Stay tuned. From Riccardo Amati, goodbye and good luck with your work.
Thanks for listening to Perspectives in Mobile. Join us next as we explore telecoms, technology, and mobile innovations. Stay tuned, stay connected, and let's unlock the mobile potential together.